Getting more and more clues post-combine on who the 49ers might target with the 11th pick in the NFL draft. I've got a top 3, and Jason, it's not going to be anybody else other than one of these 3 guys. Joey Bosa, Trey Hendrickson, potential fits for the 49ers. All that and more right now on a special Picante episode. OT with BP right now. Welcome to another Picante show. Peacock and Aponte here on the OT with BP channel. We're going overtime. This is the channel for more thoughts from me. If you don't follow enough of my podcasts, Locked On 49ers daily on the Locked On Network. We got Peacock and Williamson daily breaking down the entire NFL on the Locked On Podcast Network. And this is my other channel, my personal channel, OT with BP. No rules here. We can go as long as we want. We go as short as we want. We can go off topic if we want to. And I love chatting it up with my guy, Jason Aponte. Also simulcast on his channel. Make sure you subscribe to OT with BP. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On 49ers. Make sure you subscribe to Peacock and Williamson. And make sure you subscribe to Jason's channel as well. And follow us both on Twitter at BD Peacock, at Jason Aponte 2103. Let's start with the newly available players around the NFL, Jason. Now that Deebo Samuel is no longer a member of the 49ers, could they maybe make some additions to the roster before free agency hits? And new in the last 24 hours, we got Nick Bosa's brother, Joey Bosa. That's always going to make some waves. I know Mama Bear Bosa, Nick and Joey's mom, wants it to happen. I'm sure Nick and Joey would love playing together. Do you think that one could possibly work out? And if not, what about a trade for, say, Trey Hendrickson, a guy that could get you double-digit sacks any given season? That'd be a huge addition to the 49ers defensive line. What are your thoughts on those two guys?
I'd love Trey Hendrickson. I think he's probably the most underrated, unheralded pass rusher. And I don't know for what reason. You know, when you think about the top edge rushers, the first names that are always brought up, Garrett, Bosa, Watt, Micah. And Hendrickson always just eludes people, but he's a baller. I guess the question that I have is, what are the Bengals thinking? Because the defense was awful last year with the guy who led the league in sacks, and now you're saying, you know what, man? Go find a trade market. We'll figure it out without you. And you lose your defensive coordinator. You're losing one of the top 5 pass rushers. I don't know the Bengals thought. I guess in a perfect world where there is no cost or this newfound, I guess, rhetoric from the 49ers organization, this would be a slam dunk move. But given what they've been saying and how they've been acting, trading draft capital and then on top of that signing a player who is looking to not just get paid, as the kids say, paid, meaning he wants the bag. I don't see this as a fit. And if it was maybe just draft capital or maybe just a signing, then perhaps, like if Trey Hendrickson was a free agent, you know, maybe the 49ers wouldn't have to give up any draft capital, but they have to give up draft capital and sign him to a bag. So I don't see that one. With Bosa, you just have to hope that he wants to play with his brother bad enough that he'll take very little to come here. Vet minimum, incentive-laden deal. And then you have to think about his role, which would most likely be situational pass rusher in order to keep him healthy, which is obviously the biggest issue with Joey Bosa and has been over his career. So Bosa seems far more likely than Trey Hendrickson. I'd love to be wrong because I think Bosa and Hendrickson would feed families, if not generations, on the defensive line. But I think Bosa's far closer to being a 49er than Trey Hendrickson is at this point.
Yeah, man. What the hell are the Bengals doing? You going to sign 2 star wide receivers and try to outscore people even more than you already were? And it wasn't working. Like they got to add to the defense and probably very similar dollar amounts to bring back Trey Hendrickson or T. Higgins. And to me, the answer is obvious. And the Bengals should be trying to trade T. Higgins and draft yourself another wide receiver. And when you got a star quarterback, you should be able to develop wide receivers behind your number one guy. And I would get if the question was between Trey Hendrickson and Jamar Chase, and you got to choose one, you go Jamar Chase. But to sign Chase and Higgins sounds like their plan. It's insane. based on what we've already seen from this team that needs to get better on the defensive side of the ball, and you trade your best defensive player. And it's a lot easier to find a number 2 wide receiver, even if it's a really good number 2 wide receiver, than it is to find a number 1 defensive end, a guy that could lead the league in sacks. And you're right, man. Trey Hendrickson's been one of the more underrated players in the NFL. So I guess I'd be talking it out of both sides of my mouth, since I said that the 49ers should change their plans if they're trying to get younger and cheaper. They should change their plans for Myles Garrett. I guess Trey Hendrickson should be similarly in that boat and should cost less, a lot less, in my opinion, than Myles Garrett as far as the trade compensation goes. So, but I just don't think it's going to happen. I thinking completely different about this team than I did a couple of weeks ago after listening to John Lynch speak at the Combine. And by the way, I feel like I have so much more clarity with the draft for the 49ers, but so much less clarity about the rest of the organization and the team and what that might look like after the Combine. So it's a very strange situation. And maybe, free agency will clue us into some of this for the 49ers. But they're just not going to make a huge expenditure like that, it feels like. And even with Joey Bosa, and we know each Bosa has already held out once. Joey was right when he got drafted before he even signed his rookie contract. And then for Nick Bosa, he's had a huge holdout and gotten paid now from the 49ers. I think the 49ers would be super interested in Joey Bosa and is definitely more likely of the two. But can you see Joey Bosa taking a discount, even a family discount, to play with his brother? I don't know. The Bosas don't take discounts from what I've seen. But maybe since he's had he's been injured pretty much every season of his career, except for maybe one. And at least in recent, 4 or 5 years, would he take a 1 year, show me deal, a Sweet Harvard deal for the 49ers, 1 year contract, maybe with some incentives, and just to play with his brother and then hit free agency again after having potentially a more healthy season? Could that be a path? And that would make sense. Otherwise, I just don't see it happening.
Yeah. And again, it would be based on his role right now. I think if you bring in Joey Bosa, the idea is to try to have him for the entire season. And last year he played 14 games, and that was the most that he's played in a long time. So for a situational pass rusher, somebody that you could almost say is a rotational guy, it would have to be something that would be like that. But it all depends on how much he wants to play with Nick Bosa. And is that really high on his list? So we've noticed across the league, premium positions, they tend to have teams throw more money at those positions in hopes of a bounce back. I'm fairly certain that there's 3 to 5 organizations that are going to be out there and say, we can fix him. We have a good plan for him. And we're going to try to play this risk reward game and give him a little bit more. So it's all going to come down to what he wants to do. Is this a dream of his? For sure, to play with his brother? I think so. But how bad does he want it? And does he feel like he's earned enough over his time in the league to take a pay cut? Or does he come to the realization that, these paydays are not going to come around as often as at his age with his track record, and I might just take the money? It's really interesting.
And probably just the plan as far as any 49ers free agents goes, whether it's their own guys and it's sounding less and less like Dre Greenlaw or Aaron Banks or Talanoa Hufanga will be back for the 49ers. Someone like Joey Bosa, any free agents that the 49ers might bring in, it's probably a situation where they're just going to chill out in the first wave of free agency. And these guys have to find out that there's not a huge market for them and then come back to the 49ers on a deal that's 100%. Less than what they would sign, if the 49ers were flush with cash on the first day of free agency.
100%. And I think 49er fans are about to find the realization that there may not be the splashy moves based on what they're saying right now. You might find yourself with an Elijah Moore at wide receiver at $4.5 million a year, and he's 24 years old, and a Darius Slayton who isn't exactly. These are solid contributors, but they're not going to knock your socks off, right? They would largely be there for depth purposes. But the idea of signing a Justin Reed as safety, or spending on and it sounds like even something that we thought the 49ers might throw money at center, Drew Dahlman has got a huge market right now with the Chicago Bears, and the Bears are not messing around when it comes to fixing their offensive line. So, yeah, I think 49er fans should prepare themselves for solid names, but nothing splashy that's going to knock your socks off.
Yeah, Drew Dahlman too. It's funny because he's such a good fit for the 49ers. Somebody identified before the draft that was, it was obviously his dad's a former 49er, and he was an easy fit as someone who could play in the wide zone as a center, and he wasn't going to be a high draft pick. And, it's clearly someone that would have really fit for the 49ers. But now he's had a nice little career through his rookie contract. I mean, he's not like, what Alex Mack was when the 49ers brought him in. He's not like a superstar, like huge difference-making player at center. He's just like a nice fit, and everyone's like, oh, yeah, I need a nice fit. Like, everybody needs offensive linemen, so I feel like his market's going to kind of get out of control, and probably not someone the 49ers are going to, again, I just don't know if they're going to draft or sign somebody in the first wave of free agency. At least nobody that's a big name out there. I'm looking at a guy like Sherwood from the Jets that played linebacker under Saul. Has got some athleticism, but it might be just third wave free agents that sign cheap, that don't have a lot of money early, and then they're able to add, their 11th draft picks to the mix, and that's the offseason. Maybe some trades involved here, but it might be more outgoing than incoming trades. It's kind of ominous reports from Adam Schefter talking about the roster's gonna take a big hit, and there's gonna be a lot more going out than coming in, and I don't know what to think about this. Is this like a full rebuild, Jason? Because that's what the messaging is, but a full rebuild, but then pay your quarterback a lot. I don't know. I can't really picture what this is going to look like in the end, and even beyond 2025, because they still have a lot of pieces unless they start trading away McCaffrey and Trent Williams and guys like that. It's really even harder to picture what the 2027 team is going to look like. Is it going to be a complete flip and a rebuild, and it's just going to be Kyle and Brock and Ricky Pearsall and whoever they draft in the next three drafts?
Yeah, and don't discount the fact that the 49ers are going to take swings on players who have been largely injured, their entire career, and say, you know what, we're going to give them, players that are obviously talented, but they're checkered with an injury history, right? And that's the type of free agent that you're probably bringing in. I think, to your point and what you're asking, is this is going to be largely a team that's going to be built through the draft. And those are going to be those young, cost-controlled type of players that they are going to be able to part with other players and say, these are the guys that are going to lead us into this next phase of the Shanahan and Lynch era. And it is kind of funny that you're bringing that up about, well, if you want to get younger and you want to reset the cap, you got to pay a quarterback. And you're sending us mixed messages with your overall theme. And it's funny that all of this is happening right when you have to pay the quarterback, which makes the whole situation a little bit more chaotic. And I think that's what's funny about it is I don't necessarily disagree with you resetting the cap, with you trying to get younger, right? I think the teams that have staying power in the NFL, and I'm looking at you, Philadelphia Eagles, have been the teams that have been able to find those guys in the draft and have those impactful guys and keep them cost controlled and cheap for a long time until they're ready to get paid. But I do think that that's where this team is going right now. I think the day of the aging veteran or the known commodity might be taken off the board now, and they're going to trust their process in the draft and hope that the guys that they draft are the guys that end up with the staying power. And listen to the guys that you just said are probably going to be on the move. Aaron Banks drafted, Hufanga drafted, Greenlaw drafted. And I think they are getting back to that because of the debacle with the three first rounders for Trey Lance, and it kind of set them back a little bit in terms of being able to load up on first round talent. But they're trying to get back to, hey, we're building this team from the ground up in the draft. How long does that take? What does that look like? Is what we're going to find out. But I think that's the message that they're trying to convey right now.
This is kind of the question for me. RDC says, are they going to try and get too cute and rebuild in tiers over multiple years? And I think there's a way to rebuild on the fly, but they've kind of missed that opportunity. That would have been like getting rid of some guys a year too early rather than a year too late, right? That would have been trading Brandon Ayuk instead of signing him. That would have been like not signing Javon Hargrave, and maybe obviously, and really the two big things that stand out, and I talk about it all the time because it created a little bit of a talent vacuum on the 49ers, even though it's not obvious because those things don't hit right away. But when you spend you found your quarterback, but when you spend 3 first-round picks on a trade for Lance and it doesn't work out, like that's 3 starters that should be on your team, 3 cost-controlled young starters that you should have gotten in the first round. A second, third, fourth, fifth round pick for Christian McCaffrey, who's, obviously a really good player, but a running back. And then guess what? He gets hurt. That's the argument against trading for a running back and paying him the most. So it's like the Eagles are paying Saquon Barkley, but they didn't have to give up any draft picks for him. The Ravens didn't have to give up any draft picks for Derrick Henry. The 49ers are not only paying McCaffrey, and he didn't play last year hardly, but also had to give up a second, third, fourth, fifth round pick. So we're talking about 8 draft picks just for 2 players. Neither one of them helped the 49ers at all last year. That's 8 players, a couple starters, maybe a star in there, some useful backups. I mean, offensive linemen, defensive linemen, all the needs we're talking about for the 49ers, those picks would have gone a long way to help the 49ers. So they kind of backed themselves against the wall of like, well, you have to go all in because you need to keep going all in to stay where you're at. And if you win a Super Bowl one of these last few years, if they would have won in 2021, if they would have won in 2019, if they would have won in last year's Super Bowl, then I think you can like break it down and kind of, take your medicine a little bit easier. But it's been harder because they're so competitive. And it's part of the reason why the roster is so good, because they're competitive. And Jed York has allowed them to kind of do whatever they want. I kind of think of it as like when I take my son who's 6 years old and we go to like, go to get pizza or go to the arcade or something. He's like, Dad, I want pizza. Right? Okay, let's go get pizza. That sounds fun. Can I get some money? I want to go play the skee ball. I want to go play the claw game, right? And try to get a stuffed animal or something out of there. I'm like, okay, here's $5 or whatever. Comes back, I need some more money. And they're like, oh man, you went through that already? Okay, here's 10 more bucks. And then he comes back in. I swear I'm going to get it this time. I need to do the claw one more time. And you start to say, no, I'm not going to give you any more money. Yeah, the claw is not going to happen, guys. And so that's the way I feel like Jed York is potentially right now. He's like, John, Kyle, you went 6-11. You had a blank checkbook on this. I'm going to go buy a soccer team with this money. I'm sorry. So like, go, like you're going to have to, it's going to have to get cheaper. But the easiest way to get cheaper is not pay a quarterback. And so to me, you're either going all in trying to build around Brock Purdy or utilize Purdy as your opportunity to rebuild quickly by not spending $50 million a year. You can add a lot more other talent around you and go get a cheaper quarterback. That's the way I look at it. And it sucks because Purdy's a really good player. And I hate the Purdy conversation because of it sounds like you're hating on Purdy if you don't think he's one of the elite and should get paid $60 million a year. But I just don't think he is. I think he's really good, but not that good. Right. And could Kyle find another quarterback? I think he probably could. I just don't think that Brock is in that category of where, okay, we're just going to completely reset the roster and we're going to win with Brock Purdy expensive and no Trent, no McCaffrey, no Deebo, no Ayuk, whoever else in the future. We kind of saw what that looked like, and it was a 6-11 team. So I don't know if that is the right way to go about this rebuild. It sounds like that's the path that they're on. But right now, it's almost like you have to rip the Band-Aid off because they've missed a lot of opportunities to kind of transition and slowly rebuild. So we either got to keep spending money, keep putting on the credit card, or rip the Band-Aid off and kind of rebuild all at once, because the slow rebuild in tiers, I think, is kind of, that ship has sailed. It's going to be very difficult. And either way, the 49ers are going to have to draft awesome. And this 11th pick is massively important for the franchise.
Yeah, 100%. And I think in terms of Kittle, Warner, Bosa, Ayuk, in terms of their position group, they're closer to the top than Brock Purdy is. And no matter how you slice it, Fred's number 1. Bosa's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whenever you feel like it. Brandon Ayuk had a massively efficient season in which he pushed himself into a top 10 wide receiver conversation. I don't think Brock is in that same position. but the market is what it is. And this recalibration has to do with how the past negotiations have gone. And like you said, Jed said, okay, we're going to cave on Ayuk for you. We're going to get this done for you, but I need to see this get finished. And when it doesn't get finished, now you have the buyer's remorse on top of the fact that Brandon Ayuk, unfortunately, has this massive injury that no one knows how he's going to bounce back from. I think we're all optimistic, but we have to be realistic in the range of possibilities as to where this goes. And that's why there's so much smoke around Ayuk. Is you have an organization that didn't want to pay him $30 million because they were never going to utilize him as a $30 million wide receiver with 160 targets in their offense. You have the buyer's remorse on that. And now you have this contract that if Brandon Ayuk comes back and he is not right back in the spot that they thought he would be when they paid him, is largely immovable. And now you take the chance of trying to see if someone else will bite on this contract. If they will bite on this injury, because there's still that unknown that he can bounce back. But if he comes back and proves that he is not going to be able to bounce back, you have this massive contract that you cannot get out from under. And that's the weird part with all of this, is because they're trying to right the wrongs about how these negotiations went.
And it would really be ideal if you could wait one more year on Purdy, because that's the best thing you can have is a great cheap quarterback. But you want a great quarterback, right? That's the thing. Like a cheap bad quarterback doesn't help you. An expensive great quarterback is good. A cheap great quarterback is awesome. But what you really can't have is a super expensive mediocre quarterback. And that's sort of the thing that, and I'm not even saying that Brock is mediocre, but he's not elite. He's not one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the league. And I think teams will regret some of the deals we've seen with the comps for Brock Purdy. You know, Tua, I don't think people are saying, well, if Tua got it, well, I don't think Tua should have got it. And I think the Dolphins are going to regret that, right?
Yes.
And so if the 49ers go through this season, all of a sudden you're going to have a coach and GM who signed Brock Purdy on the hot seat if the 49ers have another bad season and you just paid the quarterback all this money. And that'll be a disastrous situation. You hope it doesn't go that way for the 49ers. And I think the 49ers offense will always be good under Kyle Shanahan. And that's kind of where I'm at with this. And I do actually agree with this comment, only bad teams rebuild and free agents. And I saw another comment about, guys, Trey Hendrickson, 30, 31 years old. That's not the smartest money to be spending. And I think the 49ers are there with you on that, where it's like, yeah, old and injured is not a good combination. And we're seeing a lot of, how many players have been cut in the last 48 hours in the NFL? Like half of these guys don't see the end of their contracts because they're old and not worth it by that time. Right. And sometimes these contracts are, might as well be written on toilet paper with how many actually see the end of them. Yeah. And crazy how NFL players are either worth everything or nothing. And it's pretty fascinating how that goes. If you don't have a guy, you're like, oh, I got to get this guy. And then you sign him and instantly it's like, oh my God, I don't want this. The 49ers need a kicker. It's like, all right, well, let's draft the best kicker, 3rd round. It's like, you suck. You're a 3rd rounder. You're supposed to be good. And that's what's going to be for Brock Purdy. It's like, everyone loves Brock Purdy until you make $60 million a year. Expectations can be crazy all of a sudden. Yeah. And if you're not playing like Joe Burrow, if you're not playing like Mahomes or Josh Allen, people are like, how did you give this guy $60 million? And instantly people would turn on you. That's just the reality. And so where are we? We're on March 6th, 2025. So come back to me in a year after you sign Brock Purdy. If the 49ers don't have an awesome season, and we'll see how people feel about that contract. It might be similar to how they feel about the Ayuk contract right now.
Yeah, and the funny thing is the quarterback market is a result of organizations being afraid of the unknown at the quarterback position, right? Mm-hmm. I think we've talked about this, Brian, right? Like it's going to take an organization to say, Tua Tagovailoa walks in, I want $55 million. You know what? No, we're not going to pay you that.
We're gonna draft and develop. And so here's one of the things that happens is, and this is so you think a deal's going to get done. And then all of a sudden, free agency done, draft done. Oh, wait, we didn't do anything at quarterback because we thought we were going to sign this quarterback. And now he's got you because it's like you can't go into a season, especially if you're a team that thinks they're going to have a shot to win the Super Bowl. You can't go into the season without your quarterback. You even can't get through training camp without your quarterback. What a quick way to derail your season, right? And so, and teams are just afraid, and for good reason a lot of times because there's some bad quarterback play out there as well. And that's kind of where I want to ask you this before we get to the draft. And by the way, I know who the 49ers are going to take at pick 11.
I love it.
Give or take one player on either side. Kawachiptu. I can't even read what that name is. Help me out on that. Kuchipu says they still had top 5 offense with no one other than Kittle. They had a bottom 5 defense and special teams. And this is kind of where I'm at with Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers, because Kyle has had all these toys and they've paid a bunch of guys on offense and went and got the best running back in the league and have the best left tackle in the league, paid 2 wide receivers, one of them now gone, just paid the second one, and the best tight end in the NFL, right? And even with Trent Williams banged up, the 49ers, pick ESPN rankings, PFF rankings, whatever. The 49ers were middle of the road offensive line. They didn't have a bad offensive line last year. They didn't have a great offensive line, but they're 14 out of 32, right? A lot of teams had a worse offensive line play than the 49ers, and they had their quarterback all year. Kyle Shanahan, the cheat code of having Kyle Shanahan is that you don't need the best running back in the NFL. You don't need 2 $30 million wide receivers. That money should be going to the defensive side of the ball. That money should go to the offensive line so Kyle can go to work and operate, right? And I think the 49ers kind of got away from that and started doing things the other way. And Kyle got a bunch of toys, and they started getting worse everywhere else. And that's been the downfall of the 49ers in recent history. I think they need to spend less money on the things that Kyle can dial up himself and spend more money on the other stuff and utilize the genius of Kyle Shanahan to make up the difference.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's part of the reasoning with the whole recalibration and the young guys, right? Is we can funnel in new guys. Juwan Jennings is a 7th round receiver. And look what he was able to accomplish in a season, right? And he's not your prototypical X. I think there's other guys that obviously, Jordan Mason is likely a trade candidate, and look at what he did given the opportunity, right? And he didn't knock your socks off in the red zone, but yeah, the old adage before Christian McCaffrey was here was anybody can step into a Kyle Shanahan offense and get himself 1,300 yards, right? Like, Devonta Freeman shows up. Tevin Coleman. We have list after list after list of guys that, have been able to be very, very successful. So I think a little bit of this newfound ideology in spending is we believe that the coach and this offense will be able to carry the load of a roster that is not as strong as it has been while we get ourselves prepared for down the line and what the future of this team looks like. And I think if you have that high opinion of Kyle Shanahan, why wouldn't you think that? If you believe that Kyle is the guy that you believe he is and how his offenses have been, regardless of who's the quarterback, regardless of who it's been, he's found a way to squeeze as much as he can out of the offense, then why wouldn't you think that? And I think that really ties into what they're thinking about right now and how they're trying to recalibrate this thing. I guess that's the new buzzword, almost like convicted and whatever, anytime that John Lynch says any of those things in the press conference, and if you took a drink, you'd be hammered after about 2 lines. But I think that if you really believe that Kyle Shanahan is who he is, part of the reason that you're able to do all of this is because of his offense.
One quick note, and I see this a lot. Richard says, yep, Brock is a Super Bowl quarterback. So was Jimmy Garoppolo. People make really bad arguments about why Brock Purdy is good. And Brock Purdy is good. And I know why Brock Purdy is good. Brock Purdy is for sure better than Jimmy Garoppolo. But anytime you're trying to talk about how good Brock Purdy is, I challenge fans out there, if you could say the same thing about Jimmy Garoppolo, don't use that. Don't say he won this many games because so did Jimmy Garoppolo. Don't say he was a Super Bowl quarterback because so is Jimmy Garoppolo. Don't say he was this was the EPA per play on the 49ers offense because Jimmy Garoppolo was right there too, right? And that's kind of the Kyle Shanahan cheat code I'm talking about. And Brock Purdy is really good. but I rarely see good arguments for and accurate arguments for why Brock Purdy is good. And so I challenge fans out there when they're talking about Brock Purdy, ask yourself before you make the argument if you could say the same thing about Jimmy Garoppolo. If you can, then find something else to say about Brock Purdy, because there's a lot of really good things to say about Brock Purdy and the reasons why. I just rarely see those reasons, which is kind of wild.
Trent Dilfer won a Super Bowl. Brad Johnson won a Super Bowl. Obviously, we're talking about different times, but the rings argument and the Super Bowl argument, it can be used against you in the same exact way. Did Trent Dilfer have to do much for the Baltimore Ravens with that historic defense? Absolutely not. Brad Johnson and the Bucs, they win their Super Bowl because the Raiders didn't bother to change any of the calls that John Gruden had in from the year before, and they literally knew what play was coming, and they had a great defense, and Simeon Rice and John Lynch and Warren Sapp and Dexter Jackson was the Super Bowl MVP that year. It's really less about the whole like Super Bowl thing if you can't put in the context of why this happened, right? I think we have a tier of the 4 elite guys, and whatever your order is, and then pretty much everybody else after that, week to week, can be slotted somewhere differently. So yeah, I think when you use that Super Bowl argument, just look around sometimes at some of the guys that have been in Super Bowls and have won Super Bowls, and that might be your clue that it may not be the flex that you believe it is.
Better arm than Jimmy, more mobile than Jimmy, better deep ball than Jimmy, better leader.
He's better.
As well. He's a better quarterback for sure.
He's
better
better.
arm than Jimmy. Jimmy Garoppolo was a ridiculous thrower of the football. He threw darts. He was accurate. His release is one of the quickest I've ever seen. Brock does have better touch. But Brock Purdy, here's one of the things with Brock Purdy, and this is what I didn't want this podcast to be about Brock Purdy, but here's the big worry about Brock Purdy. It's going to get more difficult without as many stars around him. Like, that's one thing. That's, it helps to have good players around you for any quarterback, no matter how good you are. The thing that worries me about Brock Purdy is that he doesn't have a big arm, and that's obvious. His superpower is anticipation, right? And when the anticipation goes away, the ability to anticipate, that's when he starts to look a little off. Like a receiver gets rerouted and he's not where he's supposed to be. All of a sudden look like, oh, that was a terrible throw by Brock. No, he threw it where it was supposed to be. But Brock doesn't have the type of arm that he can throw late. He can't wait till you're open and then throw it in there. He can't wait, and then hit that deep out, right? He's got to throw before you break and get it there with accuracy, with touch, and anticipation is the number one thing that Brock Purdy has. And what worries me about his arm talent is it's above the line, right? But it's not very far above the line. Wet footballs in the rain, you start to see it kind of drop below the line. He's had 2 arm injuries already in his short career. How close is he to having an arm injury to where he drops below the line permanently? We saw 40-year-old Peyton Manning in the chat, right? As one of the kind of weird quarterbacks that still won Super Bowls. He won with his mind, right? He wasn't winning with his arm at that point in his career. Late career Drew Brees could not throw the ball well. And we start comparing Brock Purdy to Drew Brees. I think there are a lot of good comparisons there with him. Brees had a better arm than Brock through most of his career. Late career, Drew Brees, he started to have a bad noodle. But that's a great example. Those 2 quarterbacks, as they started to age, their arms started to wane. Brock Purdy can't afford for his arm to wane. If a team muddies the picture, like we saw against the Minnesota Vikings, numerous teams this year, the book is out on Kyle Shanahan and the offense. If the picture gets muddied and he has to hesitate and he can't anticipate, does it start to drop below the line? So that's kind of where I'm at with Brock Purdy, because he's a really good quarterback. He's just not in that elite level of quarterbacks. And if you pay him like an elite quarterback, your build might start to be a little bit more difficult as you go forward, to put it that way. But Brock Purdy is really good. And again, if you make the argument for Brock Purdy, at least make a good argument and don't make the same arguments people made for Jimmy G.
Well, I'll say this too. When your physical gifts aren't elite, then the processing has to be elite, right? Josh Allen could be a tick off, but he has that missile that even if it's a tick off, it'll get to the spot. When you don't have that sort of arm, that's when your processing has to be consistently elite. And I think the Peyton Manning thing that they're talking about, it's not the Peyton Manning that went there the first year and threw 50 touchdowns. It's the Peyton Manning that was benched for Brock Osweiler and then had to play in the Super Bowl against the 15-1 Carolina Panthers, and they won a Super Bowl. And the other Super Bowl that he played in against the Seattle Seahawks, he got absolutely railroaded. So it's not that Peyton Manning. We're not talking about the Peyton Manning that threw 50 touchdowns that first year. We're talking about the Peyton Manning that won the Super Bowl in Levi's Stadium against MVP Cam and the 15-1 Panthers, where he was benched for Brock Osweiler. But he gets a Super Bowl ring, but he wasn't that guy. And he just held down the fort. That's all.
Oh, here we go. It's been a while since we talked about quarterback hand size. Thank you, James, for bringing that up. And I don't know how Jalen Milroe went from 8.5 to 9.5 inch hands, but he might have made himself millions of dollars for paying off whoever's doing the hand measurements at the combine. I'll never forget the conversation around Alex Smith's hand size. And by the way, Cam Ward, 9 inches flat, which is like scary. That's low. And teams get a little weird when it comes to that. James says that Purdy has bigger hands than Burrow. For your information, faithful. Okay, there you go. So it's not a hand size problem for Brock Purdy in the ring, is what James is getting at.
Right, and it's good. That means he can hold a Whopper with one hand, and it'll look small in his hand. Like, I think that's really important. When I'm evaluating quarterbacks, it's like, how does a Whopper look in your hand? Like, I think that's the part that we need to start thinking off the board.
Jason, who had the nearest combine measurements to Jason Aponte? I saw Sam Munson of PFF ask this question, and for me, it was Tet McMillan. I'm 6'041. Tet McMillan was 6'041. He's 219. I'm 225. I haven't stepped on a scale recently. I think I might need a couple of weeks of training to get to my prime weight, but I'll say 225, so somewhat close. And 40 time, he didn't run one, so mine's to be decided as well. But hand size, 9.5 for me.
Yeah, I would probably say that the closest one to me is not in stature. It's in 40 yard time is Tez Johnson.
I mean, Tez Johnson, he's still fast. Like, let's not scoff at 4.5.
No, but I think the shock is when you weigh 153 pounds, you got to be scooting, like, you know. But I think in Tez's defense, I think his play speed is a lot faster, and I still think he's a very silky smooth receiver. So I think the combine isn't everything. It's just a piece to the puzzle, but the combine has now overshadowed the tape a little bit.
Yeah, 5'8.5", 220. RDC says same measurables as Ashton Genty. 5'8", 220 can come in a lot of different styles, right?
Yeah, for sure, 100%.
Jason, I knew the 49ers are going to draft in the first round within 3 players. Okay. And if any of the mock drafts I do until further notice, and I can't wait to hear what you think about this, it's either Armand Membo, Mason Graham, or Walter Nolan. That's it.
Listen, I don't think Membo, I think Membo's for the streets now because of the combine. Right, like I think that he's gonna go. Yeah, he's going high. I think I get worried that the Patriots are just gonna say that's it, seen enough.
Yeah, I mean it was a really important day for him because he was already a solid first round guy, and I think I had him at pick 13 pre-combine to the Dolphins in my mock draft, and so like essentially what happened at the combine is he checked every single box. The tape is good. He's got the length to stick at tackle in the NFL. He's got crazy athleticism that he showed out there on the field. You see that on tape as well. And it allows teams to be like, yeah, no one, this guy's young, junior. He's only like 20 years old, his last year in college. And there's even more there than what he put on tape, even though the tape is already good. And so it's going to make a GM really feel really comfortable with him. And it definitely placed him at the top of the list as an offensive tackle. Will Campbell, short arms, he's going to play guard in the NFL. Josh Simmons would be his best competition as a offensive tackle in the NFL. He's got a major red flag with the torn patellar tendon. I don't know what to think about him. The Niners have gone through that multiple times, kind of ending players' careers. So I don't think the 49ers will touch Josh Simmons as good as he looks out there, number 71, similar to the 49ers' current number 71. He was my top guy on tape to be a pure left tackle, but Armand Membo's done a really good job to position himself as the number 1 offensive lineman in the draft, specifically tackle. A team still might like Will Campbell more if they don't care if it's a tackle or a guard, but Membo can play guard too. So, Membo might not get there at pick 11, but guys like Shamar Stewart, who I don't want for the San Francisco 49ers, worked out like crazy. I hope he goes in the first 10 picks, right? And so maybe that pushes back Mason Graham. So that's what I'm talking about. If Membo gets there, you almost can't pass on him. But the 49ers, I think, going to have a big focus on defensive tackles. If they do spend some money in free agency or get like a big name guy, it'll probably be a, who knows? And John Lynch didn't close the door bringing back Javon Hargrave after he gets released. But it'll be a second wave, third wave, probably free agent. Jonathan Allen, when he gets released, maybe they bring him in. It's not going to be a huge money contract, though. They're probably going to bring in a veteran defensive tackle, and they're going to draft a guy. It's probably the biggest need on the football team. So I expect the 49ers to draft at least one defensive tackle high, and if not in the first round, on day 2. And there's a lot of good ones. And that would be the argument for Membo in the first round, because it's going to be even harder to find an offensive tackle after pick 11. But you can find a defensive tackle. You can find some situational edge rushers. You can find corners. You can find safeties. You can find some wide receivers. It's been so hard for the 49ers to even find an offensive tackle they like enough to draft as an offensive tackle. And so you almost can't pass on Membo if he's there for you at pick 11. If he's not there, though, that makes it somewhat more likely that you have someone like Mason Graham, who wasn't able to work out, doesn't have elite measurables. This isn't the time where he's going to shine. He's only going to slip from where he was at on tape coming out of Michigan to draft day. And then Walter Nolan is a player that hasn't worked out yet. But if you're talking about defensive tackles, I just think he's got a motor. He can man that 3 technique. He can get upfield as a pass rusher. He can stop the run. He's just a complete guy and has the physical traits to be the top half of the first round player in this draft. I think there's some other players that maybe would be more dark horse candidates. I mean, Will Campbell, I'm sure the 49ers are going to love Will Campbell. I'd probably put him next on the list. And the 49ers might have an opening for a starting guard. And you know how the 49ers are with like, well, we have this opening. Here's the best guy there. We're going to draft him. So shouldn't be shocked if Will Campbell's the guy. I think for me, he would be behind the other 3 that I mentioned. And there's one more dark horse. Kyle loves his toys. And it's not Ashton Genty. It's Luther Burden. Kyle Shanahan is going to watch the Luther Burden tape and be like, why did I take up a wide receiver last year? I would have rather taken this guy. And you know what? We're going to trade Brandon Ayuk in the next year anyway. Might as well take Luther Burden. He's my favorite guy. Don't be shocked at all if the 49ers do something crazy where they trade Brandon Ayuk and draft Luther Burden at pick number 11 either. But in my opinion, right now, I won't do a mock draft that doesn't have Membo, Mason Graham, or Walter Nolan to the 49ers at 11.
So with Nolan, the buzz is off the field stuff, right? Yeah. And I wonder how much that is going to play into it, because the 49ers have shown, I think after Reuben Foster, that's it. We're not doing this with you, right? Like, even if there's even a hint of that, right? I don't think that there's issues with the player himself at all. That's why Mike Green's falling. Mike Green has apparently 2, I don't want to say the word because it's YouTube, SA cases that have happened. And that's it, right? Like, again, the 49ers are in the business of not only good players, but good people. I'll tell you this. I think it's Mason Graham or a trade back. Because at that point, I don't know if the 49ers have anyone on their board that they have highly graded enough to take at 11. And I'm sure someone will. And then to your point about Luther Burden, man, I don't know where this comes from, but the combine, they were like, Luther Burden has character concerns on the field, not even off the field stuff. Like, he had 1 foot out of the door when his quarterback wasn't playing well. He's not running routes. I'm just like, are you guys saying this so he'll fall?
Yeah.
Like, are you guys like really intense? So like, the things that you can set your watch to for sure is if a player has a checkered past with any sort of criminal activity, he's off the board. He's gone, in my opinion. With Luther Burden, that felt like a little bit of like slandering to see if someone just says like, you know what, I don't want to touch that, because you can't prove that. You can't prove that. That's something that's hearsay a little bit, right?
Yeah, it's not like there's a police report about it. And it depends on who you, and I think that's why the 49ers for a while like really went to certain colleges. They really trusted Arizona State. They really trusted South Carolina because they trusted the coaching staffs to give them the real deal dirt on players and what the real scouting report was on off field for guys and the character reports. And I think the 49ers felt burnt by Nick Saban and possibly others early in their regime. And so I think that is really important. Character is really important. And you look at all the hits the 49ers have had because they're straight up dogs, because they are hard workers, they're high character players, like all of the hits. And so that's obviously a huge point of emphasis. And that's the thing, is some guys are really some like, so the Walter Nolan thing, the only thing I've heard about Walter Nolan, and I don't even remember where I heard it now, because there was like some whispers, and it happens because like everybody changes colleges a million times now, and the transfer portal is kind of insane. The thing with Walter Nolan, he was just telling prospects that were going to A&M, where he came from, they're like, hey, watch out, man, they might screw you for your NIL money or something like that. But it's like, I don't have a problem with that. I'm not going to take him on my draft board for that. Was he doing something else? His motor, I saw in the chat, someone said he didn't like his motor. He's got a motor on the football field. Like, he doesn't, I love what I see on tape from Walter Nolan. Now, maybe there's more, and who knows? But like, I don't care if, the old coaching staff in college was mad because he left their college and have some like, lovers quarrel going on. I don't care about that, right? Is he going to work hard? Is he going to play hard? And sometimes guys who are dogs on the field are a little bit abrasive, and their personalities might not be all cheery all the time, right? As long as they work hard and play hard, and there's nothing crazy like some of the stuff we heard about Mike Green, which is unfortunate because I love his tape, and he would probably be one of those guys for me early in the first round. If it's something like that, and you probably can't do it, right? So it's hard. James Pierce, there's been whispers about him. Is he this or that? So it's just hard to know. And I think different teams are going to evaluate it differently. Kyle and John are going to meet with them, and sometimes they get a good vibe from guys, and maybe they'll get a good report from the coaching staff. Maybe you find out what the real story was, and it's no big deal. Maybe Juwan Jennings had stuff. That's why he fell to the 7th round. And also he ran like 4.7 and didn't try to, I don't think he even cared about his combine at all, because he's athletic, and he had one of the worst workouts of all time. I don't think he's as bad an athlete as it looked like at his combine workout, but he had some stuff off the field too. And there was whispers about it. And some teams, I think, didn't have him on their draft boards. And he's been model citizen for the 49ers as far as I can tell. Right. And so it's just really hard to know and hard to comment on the off field stuff unless you have really something to go by, unless there's video of him with a gas mask bong, or whatever kind of crazy stuff that happens for prospects before the drafts. It's just hard to know. And then maybe if you did know, and whatever private investigator was doing some background on some of this, and you saw like the list of things, you'd be like, oh my God, I'm not touching this guy. But yeah, and you get, remember Damon Arnett from the Raiders, who was like, oh my God, how did you draft that guy in the first round? Because there was already whispers about it, and he went even crazier once he got into the league. So it's hard to comment unless you know exactly, and some players you hear more details than others. But when it's just like, oh, there might be something there, it's like, I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah, what's funny is we have the film. That's all we can go off of. These interviews are really what are make or break. And it's interesting for organizations to get interviews, because I remember being at the combine that Kayvon Thibodeau was in. And every single person that I spoke to said, his interviews, he's bombing them. I don't know if he's doing it on purpose. Does it seem like he has an attitude? But you, as the organization, have to evaluate the player and weigh the risk and reward of, hey, listen, that's something that he did when he was younger. We think he's grown from it, and we're going to take that chance. And let's not forget, these guys in the front office, their job is success-based, right? You can have a room full of 53 nice guys, and they're all at fine pass, and that team could stink. Look, it's just the nature of the business. We are only privy to the tape. We are only privy to the things that we can look at. We're not in these interview rooms. Some guys interview horribly, but when they get on the field, they perform. Can you take that chance? I don't know. That's the hard part. That's the missing piece that all of us have when it comes to this draft evaluation process as we're on the outside. But I do know that if there's even a hint of a little something with this organization, they're not going to touch it. They're just not going to touch it. We don't know the details. We don't know the finer details. And we know that they have to do their, that's the buzzword, due diligence on figuring out what that is. And I think for me, when I'm looking at it, and I agree with one of your picks for sure, because the only thing is that I think Membo is for sure going to go a little bit higher than 11. If the Niners want him, they're going to have to move up for him and jump somebody.
I do want to say this about the combine, and like the hottest names right now in every mock draft are like Eman Wari and Membo, and guys start to go crazy high. There's still pro day workouts to come. There's still interviews and meetings, and if you gave Membo, if you ranked him 17 in the draft on tape, you're not going to draft him at 4. So I just think that we're in the combine, the post combine buzz era of the 2025 offseason. And I think some things will normalize. Some players will go high. And look, Membo could go pick number 4, and I might put him at pick number 4 in my next mock draft. I don't know. But we still haven't seen Ted McMillan work out. We still haven't seen Will Johnson work out. And it might normalize back down. So don't be shocked that everyone puts these guys that were combine superheroes up super high, and Shamar Stewart and all these guys. And then when we go back through the tape again and everyone's done working out, and you hear about stuff and this team likes it this way and different guys are mocking this and insiders are saying this, don't be surprised if it kind of normalizes and they kind of fall right back down. Maybe not to where they were, but I don't think we just know how crazy the NFL draft is. You shouldn't be shocked if Membo goes 4. You shouldn't be shocked if he goes 17. It's just the nature of this class, even more than others, and just the nature of the NFL draft. You should probably never say there's no way blank happens. Even Andre Carter. Abdul Carter, thank you. Andre Carter, very different defensive end prospect. Abdul Carter, he kind of skated from the combine without getting measurements. And I'm like, wait a second, hold on. We still need to know how big you are, dude. Is he short? Or is he 6'3", 250 with 34-inch arms? Or is he 32.5-inch arms and 245 and 6'2.5"? Because it starts to change. And like, is he that dynamic that you would still draft him number 1? So it's not done and written on him yet either. And he's got that foot injury that different teams might look at differently. So, I mean, there's still a lot that can happen, a lot can change in the NFL. People always say crazy stuff about people's mock drafts. The real NFL draft is going to be way more insane than the craziest mock draft you've seen. It is every single year. So prepare for it, because that's the way it is.
And that goes back to my point about the combine overshadowing everything else. You get enamored with the combine and you lose sight of the tape. And you lose sight of the fact that the combine is one part of the process. And again, the combine, for the guys that are solidified, I understand why they don't run or they don't do anything, because all you can do is damage yourself, right? The tweeners and the guys that are in between trying to boost their stock, that's where they boost their stock, is the combine. That's why Cam Ward doesn't have to throw. That's why Shedeur Sanders is not going to throw. They'll throw at their pro days where they can control everything and make themselves look as good as they can, because they're not going to lose stock there, right? And that's the part of this process that's hilarious, is a high combine performance can push somebody to heights that they've never seen. And maybe the best thing that ever happened to the 49ers with Mason Graham is that he didn't test. He did not test. He didn't go out there. He didn't blast it. He didn't go crazy, because then people would start to chatter about him a little bit higher. Michigan's pro day is very, very interesting to me, because I do believe, now listen, I believe the 49ers are going to take Mason Graham. I do. If he's there at 11, they're going to run that card right up there, because they've been missing a guy who doesn't come off the field at defensive tackle, who can run, defend, and pass rush. Not one or the other, just like Javon Hargrave, Malik Collins, and Jordan Elliott. They can do one or the other. They can't do both. Mason Graham's a pick at 11. But I want Will Johnson at 11, Brian Peacock, and I know that that's going to piss you off, man. I know that it's going to piss you off.
Well, look, I think Will Johnson is going to go probably in that neighborhood. Again, I think Michigan has the most fascinating pro day of all of them.
Yep.
And because of how much impact there might be on the top 10 because of multiple guys there. But Will Johnson kind of already measured in smaller than I thought. And when I watched him, my comp for him, a lot of people put Patrick Surtain on it. I'm like, I saw a Hall of Fame player. I saw Richard Sherman.
Yeah.
And it's such a good fit for the 49ers defense. But the opportunity to draft a lineman at 11, it would be pretty frustrating for a team that has trouble finding offensive tackles, that has trouble, that is built on the idea of we're going to be awesome on the defensive line, and to pass up on those positions. at 11 for me would potentially be a mistake. But Will Johnson at his best could be awesome. And I can't decide if I want him to run really fast, so that way you want to draft him at 11, or you want to run really slow so that you don't want to draft him at 11, but maybe he gets there closer to pick 43 or something like that. Because he's so good in off coverage and he's such a smart player. I think there's enough questions about him that he's not the slam dunk, and I thought he was going to be bigger. So that's already like one. If he doesn't run like 4.45 or faster, and I'm not sure he will. He doesn't really have he doesn't have the resume. The tape is really good, but just from the man coverage, what you are height, weight, speed wise of a top 15 corner.
Yeah. So for me, I think a lot of what you said is true, because Richard Sherman wasn't the fastest guy. Richard Sherman is somebody who's very smart. And I think if you were to ask people about Will Johnson before this season, let's say the draft was before this season that he just had, he's a top 5 pick, but he has the injuries, and that's the first part, and the production wasn't there. So that's the second part. And then you talk about the height and the size and all that stuff. I just think that when I'm looking at the way this Robert Saleh defense with Gus Bradley in tow, sounds like they're going to get right back to that Legion of Boom cover 3 type thing, and that's exactly where he's going to excel. I do think he's a little bit better in press man than people are giving him credit for. I do think he can do all of those things. And when we're talking about pass rush, right, here's your issue, and here's probably the way that I would go about it. If they do decide to take Will Johnson, which I don't think they will, by the way, I still think it's Mason Graham. I'm going off of who I would love to see, because I would love to see Johnson, Green, Lenore, and I would think that right there you can find your way into some coverage sacks. But then that means you have to go address the defensive line in free agency.
Yeah.
And it doesn't sound like you're really prepared to do that at defensive tackle. And you'll probably end up with some guys that, again, are a little bit down the line. BJ Hill from Cincinnati, or, you might take a swing on Azeez Ojulari at edge. But I don't know if the 49ers are in the business of doing all that, especially when Mason Graham is there. If Mason Graham's there, they're going to run the card up. Because they've been dying to replace DeForest Buckner and Eric Armstead with guys that don't come off the field. And that's exactly what Mason Graham profiles as. I just selfishly would love to see what the secondary would look like with Robert Saleh and those guys, all 3 of those guys who can cover very well and would fit this scheme perfectly glove in hand, as Jordan Reed of ESPN told me yesterday when I interviewed him for a little bit. But I just don't think that they're going to do that. They've never had a tendency to take corners very high. When you have Renardo Green in the second round, that's your example of, we don't need to do that. And I think you're right. Yes, you can address defensive line in the second round, but it'll never feel as good as getting a Mason Graham at pick 11. So I just think that if he's there, there's no way that they don't run up the ticket and go get him.
And that's the highest the 49ers have drafted a DB period was the last pick in the second round. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just don't.
Regime, at least, right? Yeah, it was Jimmy Ward. Jimmy Ward was bulky, right?
Jimmy Ward was bulky. I see in the chat here, Eric Armstead and Buckner were 6'6" and 6'7". They were both 5 technique defensive ends in a 3-4 when they were drafted. Mm-hmm. That's what they were drafted to do. And yeah, so I feel like I have a good handle on the draft class right now. Pro days might change some things, but there was probably more players eliminated than added to the list for me from the NFL scouting combine.
No question.
Now things get kind of crazy in the second round, third round. There's a lot of really good prospects, and I don't have a really good feel on what's going to happen at the back half of the first round, and who they're going to be those first round guys, who are going to be the second round guys. And there were guys that I would have swore would have been first round guys last year that were there in the 40s, Cooper DeJean and Jackson Powers Johnson. And, like guys like Zach Frazier were there in the second round. The 49ers can get a really good player at 43 high in the second round. So sure. I'm excited about that as well. And much better chance they get a defensive tackle there than an offensive tackle, which is the argument for Membo in the first round if he's there, mm-hmm. which is why you almost can't pass up on him at this point if he's there. But I'm going to leave you with one more thing here, Jason, to ponder. We can touch on this more next week.
Is this homework?
It's not really homework. It's just what if, and nobody's bringing this up, and I find this shocking. What if the 49ers already have their offensive tackle of the future? It's Dominic Puni. Dominic Puni I was shocked. My biggest takeaway from training camp last year was how big Dominic Puni was. I didn't realize how big it was. He was like the biggest offensive lineman on the team. He's huge. And he's got more athleticism, longer arms than Colton McKivitz does. So if Colton McKivitz can start at offensive tackle, Dominic Puni can for sure start at offensive tackle. And maybe the 49ers saw something that maybe they didn't quite expect. I know they expected Dominic Puni to be good when they drafted him in the third round, but maybe they didn't expect him to be that good. Maybe they said to themselves, look, we have found money. We already got our offensive tackle of the future. We don't have to chase that now. We can go a different way with the 11th pick in the draft, knowing that we can kick Dominic Puni out to either left tackle or right tackle when we need to. Now, they might still need another offensive tackle post Trent Williams and Colton McKivitz. I don't know if they probably won't get another contract with the 49ers. We'll see how that goes. But an interesting solution in offensive tackle. Then you can draft and develop more interior guys, centers and guards, which is a lot easier to do, knowing that you have someone who is your future offensive tackle in Dominic Puni.
I'll throw one more thing at you.
Okay.
Do not discount the idea that the 49ers do believe in the people that are in their building to do that. Spencer Burford. And the idea that he was a left tackle and that he performed better when he became the left guard for that little stretch, right? It almost seemed like everybody but Aaron Banks, when they were given the chance to play left guard, impressed over their time. So I'm with you, because Burford could be a candidate to kick out. And if they believe that he can do it, then he can. It's obviously going to be a drop off because he's going from Trent Williams to him. Same thing for center. Matt Hennessy, Zakel, maybe Barch, right? Don't discount this idea. Brian's not bringing up anything that shouldn't be taken into consideration. And that is the source of frustration for 49ers fans, is you have such a belief of all the people in your building instead of there's a guy that you know for a fact that you can draft that'll go there as well too. So I love this idea, and it is a good talking point. I think we should start the next show with this. Absolutely, 100%.
Let's make the lines great again, Jason, on the San Francisco 49ers. Offensive line, defensive line, still the most important part of this offseason to me. And going another direction other than those two spots, especially offensive tackle and either edge or defensive tackle with the 11th pick, it's a tough sell for me to go a different direction. But if there is a guy that is in a different tier of a prospect at 11 that's at a different position, then you got to take the best player, because that's how you build the best football team too. And that's what free agency is for, is to attack some of the immediate needs. Could just be a Barch Burford competition for left guard next season.
And I think that's what they're thinking. And, and that's the other part about drafting guards high with high picks, because it felt like Banks was a little too high. With Puni, you can make the argument that he will be a tackle, but he was a guard as well too. And then the Will Campbell thing is, you're having him play guard under the impression that you're going to move him to left tackle. But what if the 49ers don't believe that he'll be able to kick out to left tackle? Do you take yourself a guard at that high? I don't know if they do. And that's the interesting part right here. I think the one thing is for certain is the center position has to have a change. There has to be a change, an upgrade, whether that's Matt Hennessy, whether you believe in Zakel, whether, obviously I think it sounds like Drew Dalm is not in the plans. Maybe that's Ryan Kelly. I don't think you can roll into next season with Jake Brendel at center and with a straight face and sell us on the idea that everything's going to be fine.
I don't know. That's Forrester's guy. He was with Forrester in Miami, and he's had great things to say about him. He was asked, I think Larry Krueger asked him, why is Spencer Burt, or why is Jake Brendel, why does he have no competition and named the other centers on the roster? And he's like, oh, he's a better player. It was like, that's his guy. So the 49ers might feel differently than just about everybody else in the world about Jake Brendel as the starting center for the 49ers. And I don't think you can draft a guy and expect him to play center for Kyle Shanahan and make all the calls. So if you draft the future center, he's probably got to either be a backup or play guard for a year and then, move him into the role. Do they have the money to spend on one of the free agent centers? And do the 49ers view that as a position to upgrade in the offseason is my question. And I'm not sure, because I think that's Forrester's guy. And to be honest with you, Forrester's done a phenomenal job. He's a really good offensive line coach too. And he's done a lot with a little. And he's also towing the company line, talking about how, it's okay that we didn't draft an offensive lineman. It's my job to get these tough, smart guys ready to play. And I think a lot of times you can do that. And that's why offensive line is a unit, and it's not, 5 individual players. And it's a lot easier to draft and develop and find the interior offensive linemen than offensive tackles. too, which is why for me, it's not about drafting a guard early. It's about drafting an offensive tackle. Like if you draft a guy at 11, he better play offensive tackle. That's why for me, Will Campbell is kind of as good as he is. By the way, I think Will Campbell could be like a perennial all-pro center. I would love to see Will Campbell as a center. He'd be one of the best centers in the NFL. He's super smart. I just don't know if you can go that way at pick 11.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Again, it's the positional value. And what do they value, right? I could love Will Johnson all I want. I don't think they're going to take him at corner, right there at 11. So, and just the way that the 49ers have kind of bargain bin dove on these, like even the Matt Hennessy poaching of the practice squad from Atlanta, kind of just signals like, hey, we're gonna try and see what one of these guys does, and it's just and it's just like what Forrester said. We invest in guys that can score touchdowns. And whether he believes that or not, that's something that's been coming out of his mouth. But I just think that, again, if we're looking at guard, if we're looking at somebody that's going to be a guard or something like that, I don't know if they have the stones to take them like really high. I think, again, this has to be like a Mason Graham or bust, if not a trade back where you can get one of those guys that you're not comfortable with at 11.
Always fun, Jason. Let the folks know where they can find all of your work. And guys, you got to make sure you subscribe to Jason's YouTube channel if you're not already there right now watching this simulcast.
Appreciate that. YouTube, obviously, I'm trying to work on a film breakdown for the Bears game to kind of highlight some of the things that Brock has done well, explain the concepts, all that stuff. I'm going to try to get into that. I'm getting a little burnt out with draft talk, so I'm going to start there. But every single day on NinersNation.com, I write on there, so you guys can check out any articles on there. And on Twitter, Jason Aponte, bunch of numbers, 2103 on Twitter. So everywhere you can find me. Thanks again, Brian. These shows are always fire, man.
Absolutely. We'll do it again next week. You can find me on Twitter at BD Peacock. Of course, I'm doing it every single day. Locked On 49ers, Locked On Podcast Network with my guy, Eric Crocker, and the Peacock and Williamson NFL show, breaking down the entire league daily. So subscribe there, and Picante will be back at you next week. See you then.